Art history, Baroque. Okay, so now we are entering our next phase after the Renaissance, and that would be Baroque art. The time frame here for Baroque art is roughly 1600 to about 1770 or so. And it's really kind of our first international type of era, really, that because of, I think, probably travel, the ability to move from one place to another, that all the art here is going to look a lot more similar than it has beforehand. That artists are able to observe what other artists are doing, and regardless of where you are in Europe, a lot of this Baroque art is going to move along these same themes. Okay, so let's look at some of these themes that we see with Baroque art. Okay, so this example here is from someone who's really credited with really kind of starting this movement, and it's pretty rare in art history that we have one person that's really credited with bringing all of these things together, but it's the case that we see here. Okay, and so this is Caravaggio, and with Caravaggio we see this example. This is the Conversion of St. Paul. And maybe the first thing we would recognize about this is it's very dark, that we have really dark darks and we have really light lights. There is a very extreme value range here. Okay, and that's something that we see that we'll get into here in a little while. But this type of extreme chiaroscuro that we see, it has a particular name called tenebrism. And that's basically when we have really light lights, really dark darks, and we don't have a lot of intermediate values there, which is what we see here. And so if there's one thing that Baroque art is really geared towards, it's that artists are trying to move in the direction of drama. Okay, and so we're going to see everything trying to give us as viewers a sense of drama, a sense of emotion, a sense of splendor. There's something really kind of epic about this type of art. We're going to see a lot of energy, a lot of feeling, and a lot of usages of light, scale, and composition to try to achieve that. Okay, and so if you're an artist and you're trying to create a sense of drama, what drama would be when you have two things that are contrasting, two things that are conflicting. And so as an artist, all we would have are the different art elements to be able to try to show that. And so if we look at different contrasts, you could have a contrast between shapes, you could have a contrast between warm and cool colors. One of the major contrasts that artists use here in Baroque art is the simple contrast between light and dark. And that if you're trying to make the contrast as extreme as possible, this extreme chiaroscuro or tenebrism here is what you would come up with. Okay, because you have these really light lights, really dark darks, and not much here in between. Okay, so that way, in terms of formalism here, you're creating that visual sense of drama through that value range. So that's what we see here. Another thing that's adding to the drama is just the story that's being shown. That most of the time with Baroque art, they're going to show in a particular story the moment of action where something is taking place. And so if we look at other corollaries at this time, around the year 1600 is around when Shakespeare's famous Globe Theater, that whole thing is going on. And so a good way to think of Baroque art is this theatrical type of art, because the lighting isn't even really terribly naturalistic. It would be something that would have to kind of be produced almost in a theatrical way. Okay, and so that's what we see here is kind of the middle of the action, the middle of the drama taking place. In this case, it's the Conversion of St. Paul, so it's showing that moment when he's thrown off of his horse during his conversion here. And so we can see his arms are being thrown up into the air. You can see the horse's hoof is in the air. All of that is in the motion of what is going on. And so we see that's something that heightens this sense of drama. The fact that it's shown in the middle, right in the middle of the action that's taking place. The fact that it's some type of dramatic subject matter taking place. All of those things are contributing to that. And one thing that is coming as developing from the Renaissance is this insistence on proportion and naturalism. That's something that we see here. You can see there's a lot of detail here with Baroque art. In some ways it's even more detailed than Renaissance art. For instance, you can kind of see the veins and even the horse's leg as well as the man's leg there standing up in the background. And so that insistence on naturalism is something that's going to help with the feeling of the dramatic as well. If it was just like cartoon characters, it wouldn't have the same dramatic feel as if they look very naturalistic. Okay, so all of those things are combining for this heightened sense of drama. Another thing that's contributing with that is where we are as a viewpoint, that we're really close up here. That all these figures barely really fit within the picture plane. And so it gives us a sense of almost eavesdropping, that we're in the same area of these people. Okay, and so your proximity to an event that takes place is going to affect how much it affects you. You know, if you hear about some kind of tragedy, you know, going on in some place that's farther away, it's not going to have the impact as if that same tragedy happens like right next door to you. Okay, and so the fact that our proximity is very close is another contributing factor. And so on top of all of that, we see also dramatic angles, expressions, and emotion. Okay, so those are all things that we'll see typically here with Baroque art, as this is a pretty good example of. And the last thing maybe would be the sense of kind of more of a mystery. With Renaissance art, everything is kind of clear. With this, because of the dramatic lighting, because of the darkness, sometimes the figures in foreground and background can kind of become a little bit more confusing, and that kind of mysterious nature kind of falls in with this dramatic type of art that we see. Okay, here are two more examples by Caravaggio. These are really two of his first paintings that really bring him to prominence. The painting on the left is the Calling of St. Matthew, and the painting on the right is the Martyrdom of St. Matthew. And so these were companion paintings that were done at the same time for the same place. And we see the same type of thing happen. Dramatic lighting in both of them. We see a dramatic subject matter in both of them, the moment that action is taking place. In the left, it's him being called, and on the right, it's his martyrdom. Okay, so we see those things. Our viewpoint, really close up. In both of these, it looks like we're in the same room here. So we see that. We see the the extreme detail, the extreme naturalism, that type of vivid realism that is associated with Baroque art as well. Okay, so all of those things combined give us this sense of the drama, of the theatrical. Okay, as we move on to sculpture here, this is a very good example of a sculptor who's working in this Baroque style, and his name is Bernini, and this is his rendition of David. And so if we remember back to Donatello's version of David, he's basically just standing on Goliath's head after the battle has taken place. But with Baroque art, we're trying to be more dramatic, so we're showing it in the middle of that action taking place. So here, his whole body is in movement. You can see in his face that expression there. He's furrowing his brow. He looks like he's really concentrating. He's biting down on his lip. His body is in that rotation. You can see the weight of his legs going from that back leg to the leg there here in the foreground. That this middle of action taking place is something that we see with Baroque art as opposed to the Renaissance art. Another example of that is this one. This is the Ecstasy of St. Teresa, where she has this account of basically this angel who stabs her with this arrow, and she's filled with this ecstasy. And so we can see here again that it's showing this thing being very epic, this moment of action, that this subject matter is taking place here. Okay, so we see it with two-dimensional art, we see it with three-dimensional art like sculpture. It's also something that we see take place especially all around Europe in architecture. Okay, so this is an example from one country in Europe. This is an example from a different country in Europe. This is an example from a different country in Europe. and they're all examples of Baroque architecture. Okay, you see a lot of decoration, obviously, with this example. You see a lot of painting used with the gilding. In this case, we have a lot of trompe-l'oeil painting, which is something we see a lot with Baroque art. We see a lot of decorative elements here. It is, like I mentioned, very, very kind of impressive, epic type of artwork, because it's you know, it's really goes all out in a lot of ways. Okay, this is what something Baroque on the outside would look like. Usually, you have some type of classical elements. You know, you see a lot of columns, something almost classical, but you also see a lot of sculpture interacting with that. A little bit more ornate even on the outside, but especially so here, obviously here on the inside too. Another example of that, this would be placed basically in Versailles in France here, and another example here of this type of interior architecture. We have a lot of that that painting mixed in with the gilding there on the top, a lot of the trompe-l'oeil effects that we see mixed in with the classical elements like the columns here. So all of this is good examples here of the Baroque style of architecture that we see really pervade all of Europe almost. The one example that I would like for you to know here is this particular structure, and this will be our example for Baroque architecture, and it's a place called the Hotel des Invalides. Okay, it's a place here in Paris. So hotel is H-O-T-E-L, and then des, D-E-S, and then Invalide is I-N-V-A-L-I-D-E-S, Hotel des Invalides. And it's a very good example of this type of Baroque architecture. In this case, it's a French Baroque. So we do have some classical structure to it that's a little bit more ornate, interacting with some sculpture, interacting with that gold gilding that we see. And so we see that on the outside on the picture of the left. And in the picture on the right, that's how that same structure looks like from the inside. And so we can see on the top there that trompe-l'oeil painting. We see the work of the gold again there, giving structure to some more painting there on the inside. And that's extended pretty much there from the top all the way down there. That you can see how much ornamentation the interiors have, how much detail. There's a lot of kind of curvilinear elegance to Baroque architecture. And this is certainly a good example of that. Okay, so in the same way that you see the style look very similar in other ways in terms of architecture, we see that with the painting as well. Okay, and this is an example of a northern artist whose artwork looks similar to the art in Italy, like we see with Caravaggio. This artist's name is Peter Paul Rubens. Okay, and so this particular example here is called the Elevation of the Cross. And so here we see the middle of the action, that something is taking place. Okay, so we see that middle of the action, something dramatic happening, showing it in the middle of something dramatic happening. We have this very extreme light and dark. The only way we can tell this is actually a picture from the daytime is that background over to the right of the image. You can see the sky with the blue sky and the white clouds showing that it's daytime. Otherwise, the lighting looks like it would be, you know, this theatrical light type of lighting you would see at nighttime. So we have that extreme light and dark with this type of lighting that we see. Again, our proximity is really close to what is going on. And so it gives us a feel like we're part of the action there. And again, the last thing is this vivid type of detail and these vivid type of expressions and emotions. You can almost feel the way that these guys are pulling and struggling to pull up this cross. You can almost feel the you know, the muscles there working there, trying to get this cross up. And in addition to that, here also the vivid realism with, for instance, the armor. It looks like a shiny armor that we see there. The flesh looks like real flesh. The the landscape is a convincing landscape, and the drapery looks like a real drapery. So all of those things that we see with Caravaggio, we see here with Rubens. Okay, another thing that we see is really a golden era of painting in terms of the Dutch era here, or the Dutch area maybe. And there's two artists in particular around this area that are very well-known painters that are working at this time period. This is one of them. This is Johan Vermeer, sometimes referred to as Jan Vermeer. And so with Vermeer, he's very well known for his attention to the nuances of color is something he's really well known for. So you can see here, it's obviously not the most dramatic of scenes. This is called The Milkmaid. But he is showing the moment of action that she is pouring the milk. And so in that sense, he is showing the moment of the action here taking place. The thing that is really Baroque here is the extreme lighting as far as light versus dark. That we see that one light source from the window create this area of highlight versus some really dark colors. And so if we look at this example, we can see that his paintings do have a lot of unity to them, and part of the reason why is that the color schemes he tends to work with, like we see here, he uses some really contrasting colors, which obviously here gives it that sense of contrast. But when you add those colors together, they make grays, and so it gives that unity to something like this. Okay, so an artist that is similar to Vermeer here in his attention to the nuances of color, but has a pretty different style, is this other Dutch artist here. His name is Mr. Rembrandt. Yeah, I don't know why it took me so long to remember his name. But Rembrandt, he's really one of the best-known painters. And this particular example of his is one of his best-known paintings called The Night Watch. And so with Rembrandt, like I said, like with Vermeer, he had really good attention to the way that color operated. He also used this very dramatic lighting that we see in this case too. He's also very well known for doing self-portraits. He was very would always kind of return to them throughout his life. There's several examples of his self-portraiture, and really once he kind of achieves kind of this mature style later in life, he really is well known for using really thick brush strokes, and it's kind of hard to see from this vantage point here. But he really does use really thick, expressive brush strokes. So much so that if you really went up close to some of these paintings, it would look almost abstract in the way that he's throwing the paint down on the canvas. But when you kind of step back, you can see how they make sense in terms of the objects and the figures that he's trying to show. But very good at observation. He's very good at obviously drawing light and dark, being able to render that. He's still using that chiaroscuro that we see of the really light lights versus the really dark darks that is so emblematic here of the Baroque style. Alright, so the last thing we're going to go over here with the Baroque style is something called Rococo. And Rococo is basically a light, playful version of the Baroque style. You have the same type of elegance, the same type of curvilinear kind of details with the gilding and the portraits and the trompe-l'oeil painting, that type of thing. But what is really kind of heavy and theatrical in Baroque really becomes lighter and more gestural in the Rococo time period. And so with this example, this is a good example of the Rococo in terms of architecture. This is the Hôtel de Soubise. the Hotel de Soubise, or Soubise, I guess. It's Hotel, and then De, and then Soubise, Soubise. Okay, and so you can see here how kind of opulent the style is, how decorative it is, and it's not a style really that lasts very long because it's kind of seen as overly romantic and extravagant to a certain extent. A good example of that would be this painting here. This is the artist Jean-Honoré Fragonard, and the title of this painting is Happy Accidents of the Swing. Okay, and so you can see here that in terms of painting quality, he's very good at being able to handle the paint. He's got some really impressive atmospheric perspective there as you move on from the background to the foreground here. You can tell he's quite adept there at handling paint and being able to handle the brush. It almost kind of looks like it's airbrushed on there, really. Very, very light, deft touch there. But you can see it's kind of lacking the seriousness that the Baroque style has. From the very title here, Happy Accidents of the Swing, you can see that it's not like the same type of serious nature. We have this, what looks to be kind of a young debutante there being swung, because I guess it was too much effort to have to swing yourself. She's being swung there, and you can see her shoe is flying off, which I'm guessing that's the happy accident, but you're left wondering what the guy in the lower left is doing there. It seems awfully creepy. And then when you pay more attention to it in terms of its structure, there's certain details, like anatomically it doesn't make exactly a lot of sense, because with her, for instance, it looks like her leg bone would be completely out of proportion. It looks like her femur there, the knee bone from the knee to the hip, would have to be either really curved or really long, or both, to be able to actually make sense of this particular composition here. And so little details like that doesn't have kind of the seriousness that Baroque art does, nor the subject matter, obviously, here. And so you can see why it becomes synonymous with kind of being overly romantic and kind of extravagant to the point of frivolity here. Okay, but like I said, this is kind of the light, playful version of the Baroque, the Rococo, and it's really kind of the last gasp of this particular era of art.